Progressivism is a societal cancer. Oh, hi there. Welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Of all the issues on which the American left goes in full agitprop mode, voter ID is by far the most retarded of them. It really does speak volumes of the stupidity of left-wing supporters, since the argument for voter ID is as commonsensical as it gets. One ought to be able to produce an ID in order to cast a vote. It really is that simple, and the overwhelming majority of the planet already understood this almost a century ago. From India to Congo, from all of Europe to Venezuela, and everything in between, producing an ID in order to vote is common sense for the entire political spectrum and all groups and subgroups. But not for the American left. Last Wednesday, a panel of federal judges decided that Hispanics and blacks are too stupid to figure out how to get a photo ID. Now, of course, they didn't phrase it in this fashion, but their decision quite literally amounts to declaring certain groups as being so messed up that they just can't do it. In the opinion of the 3 judges panel, the voter ID requirements in Texas were racist. Because potato, or something like that. Now, if I were to be really mean, I'd say that if they can't figure out how to get a photo ID, then surely there's a case to be made that they can't figure out how to vote responsibly either, right? The reality is that's not the case at all. Even the People's Republic of The Guardian admits it when they quote a left-wing study where they say, quote, 12.8% of the respondents either strongly agreed or agreed that their lack of a state-approved form of photo identification was a reason why they did not cast a vote, whilst the 5.8% listed lack of photo identification as the principal reason they did not vote. Yet when questioned further, less than 3% of them did not in fact have one of the valid forms of ID. So, in other words, 12-point-something% were unsure whether they were meeting the conditions or not, and instead of going to the polls and check whether they do in fact meet the conditions, they voluntarily chose not to bother. Had they chosen to check, 3 out of 4 of them would have found out that the new law is indeed common sense for common people who in fact do need an ID anyway to function in society, whether they vote or not. But somehow, this reality is being successfully obfuscated by the relentlessly race-baiting rhetoric perpetrated by the cathedral media to such an extent that calling voter ID an unconstitutional poll tax is made to seem like a logical and genuine argument. But is it? The Government Accountability Office studied in 2014 how much does it really cost to get an ID. It turns out that in almost all cases it costs either around $15 per 10 years, or if you only need an ID solely for voting, you only need to spend $25 once in the entire life to get a birth certificate and then get the free ID offered only for voting by most of the states with voter ID laws. Link in the low bar on this issue. So, in a country where $34,000 a year is considered poverty, I find it really hard to believe that $25 in a lifetime is such a prohibitive expense. Remember, voting is not mandatory, so if you want to have a say in how taxpayers' hard-earned dollars are being spent, it's not unreasonable to also be expected to get a freaking ID. You know, when my country joined the EU, I suddenly couldn't renew my passport, which I would already use only to travel outside the EU anyway. Why? Because getting a passport requires a birth certificate, and the birth certificates with the communist emblem on them were not acceptable in the EU bureaucracy. So I had to change that one first, which meant traveling 700 kilometers to get it from my place of birth. Would it have been acceptable to cry xenophobia over this? In fact, if I think a little bit further, I would have had much more of a case than the American leftists because I wanted to travel outside the EU, not to influence something within the EU. But let's just leave Europe aside for a moment and let's look at India. India is 4 times larger than the United States in terms of population. More people live on less than $50 a month in India than the entire population of the United States. India is also the largest democracy in the world in terms of voters. Yet somehow, with all those huge chunks of genuine poverty, voter ID is still not a contentious topic, and everyone procures one and then goes to the ballot box. Say what you want about Indian politics, but at the end of the day, the American leftist argument against voter ID is just utter rubbish. Especially considering the so-called poor in America who actually live better than most of the upper middle class in India. Putting aside voting for a moment, the hypocrisy against voter ID becomes even more obvious and astounding when looking at the things for which nobody objects being asked to show an ID. Nobody objects at ID requests when buying a house, driving, boarding a plane, or registering a car. In fact, the left insists on requiring an ID when buying a gun. Yet it's somehow a civil rights violation to require an ID when deciding who should run the country, the state, or the nation. In reality, outside of genuinely poverty-stricken nations such as Malawi or Uganda, voter ID is not just the norm, but commonsensical and entirely accepted by exactly everyone. Is that where the political left takes its political inspiration? It's funny how the American left is quick to attack Uganda for its stance on homosexual issues, but the same American left is not only acceptant but militant for a Ugandan voting system to be put in place in the United States of America. Sheesh. This is so retarded. Jesus Christ. I'm done with this. Talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching.